Thanks for choosing our podcast. This is Coming Out Stories from What Goes On Media with me, Emma Goswell. This series we've been switching things around a little bit, and we've been hearing from the mums and dads of LGBT plus people to hear about those important, life-changing conversations from their perspective. Well, it's now time to meet our penultimate parent. And this is interesting. I never actually went out to seek parents who had more than one gay child, but Des is our third out of 8. He has not one, but 2 gay sons.
Yeah, so I've got 2 boys, 2 sons. Jack, who's now 21, Matthew is 17, just about to turn 18. My recollection of it, I would say, was a pretty regular childhood, really. Born in Nottingham, grew up down in Newbury, moved to America for 3 years, which was a wonderful experience.
Oh, whereabouts? Do tell.
In New Jersey, in the Garden State. So we lived up in northern New Jersey, just about 30 minutes outside New York. So that was a lot of fun.
That sounds a lot of fun. And how old were they then?
They were 10 and 7 when we moved. So yeah, came back at sort of 13 and 10. So had really good time at the American schools that they were at. And yeah, pretty regular. Jack had some challenges with bullying along the way, so he had some not so happy moments. And
did he tell you about that at the time? And were you aware about what that was about?
Yeah, never really got to the bottom of what it was about. He's redheaded, right? And kids aren't very kind to kids that look or act a little bit different. And I think he would react, right? He'd kind of bite back, and that, doesn't always work with the bullies.
Isn't it mad? So it's nothing to do with sexuality. Kids will pick on anything, won't they?
I don't think it was really. Matthew, however you use the word normal, pretty normal childhood. I mean, in terms of sort of Jack, I think pretty gender typical as a little boy, seemed to like to do boy things. Wasn't massively sporty. They both got into swimming sort of when they were over in the States, got reasonably committed to that. Matthew, probably a little bit, on reflection, less gender typical, whatever that means. So he, when he was 4 or 5, he wanted a doll for Christmas, and well, that's fine. Why not? If he wants to nurture and care for something, why not? Was a bit more colourful in his dress sense and all that kind of stuff.
Actually, that's a great idea, isn't it? Why don't more young boys get given dolls to look after? This is something that should become a thing, don't you think?
Well, if you're going to hopefully care for kids at one point in your life, getting a sense of it early is not a terrible thing. So we were never too bothered about that kind of stuff.
Did you buy him the doll?
Yeah. Right. Quite a little tiny tears doll with, it was all very meant to be realistic, right? So you had to change the nappy and you pour water in as in a fake bottle and all that kind of stuff. But he loved the thing. So.
I love that you just totally accepted that, because that should be totally normal. But I do know that there would be parents that would go, oh, what? No, certainly not buying my son a doll, and, act like a boy, not like a girl. It does happen, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can't honestly remember it being an issue. It was kind of like, if that's what you want, that's fine.
That's
one year it was that, the next year it was some Disney Penguin Play Club thing that you want. That's fine, right? If that's what floats your boat, we'll support it.
I think I was lucky to have tolerant parents as well that didn't really care about gender binaries. And my sister was into all of the dolls and had all of them, and I didn't want a single one, but they did get me my favourite gift of all time, which was Evel Knievel. The little the wind-up one with the motorbike. Oh,
that's been on my bucket list. Oh. My friend had one and I loved it, but no, I never quite got that.
Oh, I think you can still get them,
I'll get it on eBay. Nostalgia purchase.
Get it on eBay. Brilliant. So, a fairly normal upbringing by all accounts. And then were there any inclinations that any of them were going to eventually turn around to you one day and go, Mum, Dad, I'm gay?
No, Jack, not at all. Matthew, I think before doing this chat with you, I was sort of swapping stories with my wife, sort of this morning on her recollection versus my recollection. I think she had a sense that Matthew might be gay or bi. I hadn't. I was kind of almost not dismissive of it, but I felt like, well, look, we might be falling into a stereotype here. Like the fact that he likes more colourful clothing, why does that mean he's gay. Like, so I wasn't.
Exactly. It could be like.
I don't think I was kind of in denial. I just wasn't going with the stereotype. Now, in this case, the stereotype probably did turn out to be true, but I kind of didn't want to do that. But no, not with Jack at all. And I was the annoying dad that, anytime they'd mention a female friend at school or on the bus or whatever, I'd be like, could that be a girlfriend? Clearly wish I hadn't have been doing that at the time, because that might have falsely created an impression that I would have a problem if it was a boyfriend, not a girlfriend. But we hadn't, growing up, I hadn't really had any exposure to the LGBTQ community at all, didn't have family or friends. I didn't grow up in an environment that struck me as being particularly, homophobic, come from a sort of reasonably, left-leaning / progressive background. So, it was all live and let live, let everybody rub along. But I didn't have any role models that I could draw on as experiences. So I just assumed they were straight.
I guess it was a heteronormative world that you were living in, really. It's just something that you hadn't necessarily thought about, which I guess a lot of people live in that bubble, don't they? And they're probably walking past gay people in the street all the time, or they have got gay friends and they're just not aware.
Yeah, I think that probably was. You're right. I think that was the bubble. And then I think as parents, one of the people that we met through a parent support group kind of gave us this example, and it really resonated with me. When your kids are born, you shoot a movie of their life in your head, which is all your assumptions, right? It's entirely fiction, but the movie that I'd shot in my head was, as you say, heteronormative. They were going to get married, they were going to have kids, I'd take the grandkids to the football, we'd go on family holidays together. You shoot the movie of their life, which clearly bears no relation to reality, and it's entirely self-created fiction, but you do latch onto that. And therefore, that when they did come out, there was a switch. There was a sort of almost grieving process or readjustment process where I had to change my view of what their life was going to be like based on new information. So nothing to do with them, everything to do with me. Really.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's interesting you pick up on them two things that parents always worry about, I think, and that is their marriage and whether they're going to have kids or not. And yet now we all know, don't we, that there's no barrier to that if you're LGBT. There really isn't. You can still imagine your children's wedding. You can still imagine your children being parents, can't you?
Absolutely. And that's now the new movie that I've shot. But there was a period where that wasn't the movie that I was holding in my head. I think as parents, you worry, life is harder for LGBTQ plus people. It just is still. And, we can fight to try and make that not be the case. But, I worried about the homophobia they'd face. I worried about, particularly with Jack having had some bullying along the way. It was like, this becomes another thing that, could be a source of that. He wants to pursue a career in the military, and again, very, very different now, but not, when I was growing up, military was not an option for anybody that was out and gay. And
that was one of the last parts of life in the UK to change and get equality, wasn't it? It wasn't till the late 90s. So if he'd been 20 years younger and wanted that career, it would have been problematic for him.
Yeah. I think parents worry naturally. It just gave you a whole new list of things to worry about.
Yeah.
But they're both doing great and well and living out and proud lives, which is, fills me with joy, really.
Which is wonderful. And as we were just talking about before we pressed record, you are weirdly, and I haven't gone out of my way to try and achieve this, I'm talking to 8 parents, but you are the third that has got 2 gay children. Out of 2, so that's 100%. And it must be more common than people imagine, because, as I said, I didn't get out of my way to do this within this series of the podcast, but I found 3 parents. The others have both got a girl and a boy who are both gay, and you've got 2 gay sons. So I don't know why.
I don't know why either. I mean, I went for a period of sort of trying to entertain some of the thought process around why. Is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it something about me and my wife, or our genetics, or the environment we created for our kids. And honestly, that really wasn't taking me anywhere. And
No.
and actually, just the truth of the matter is, they are who they are.
Yeah.
They are the way they were created. Now, whether they, and they came to a realization at different ages, both quite young, that they were gay, and that's just how they are, and that's okay.
Yeah. And actually, Des, it's a stupid question, isn't it? Because no one would go, "Oh, you've got 2 children and they're both straight. How did that happen?" Isn't that weird? Yeah. No, you're right. It's a stupid question. It's just they just are, and gay people are born the way they're born.
Yeah. And we got lucky enough that we got 2. So
yes, amen to that. So let's go through the process of them coming out then. So who came to you first?
Well, both came out to my wife first.
Okay.
So Jack's story was, so he was, like I say, he was 16, sort of in his GCSE year at school, and was unhappy. We knew he was unhappy. We didn't know why. And there was one particular evening, I was actually away. I was on a reunion with an old works team that I used to work with. So I don't know whether that was a factor that I was somehow out of the house. But my wife said, they were just sitting on the sofa. He was clearly not happy, and she was like, "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Come on, something's wrong." And he said, "I think I might be gay." And she went over to him and put her arms around him, and told him that was fine and that we loved him and we'd do whatever we could to support him and that he shouldn't worry. I get upset about it because there was clearly part of him that worried about telling us that he must have wrestled with that for a period of time, and that we've sort of subsequently asked him and said, "Look, did you ever, did you worry that we wouldn't accept you, that we wouldn't love you?" And he was sort of, I'm 99% was sure you'd be fine, but that 1% must have eaten away at him.
Yeah.
That there was even that doubt.
And that's what happens, Des. And, do you feel guilt about that, or do you realise that that's just the way the world is? I think even if you're the most tolerant parent ever, gay people, when we grow up, we get all these messages from the world, not just our parents, telling us that we're wrong. So it's not necessarily anything you've said. It's just the world's been against us. Yeah,
again, I mean, I reflect back on some of those, when he'd talk about a female friend and I would say, "Oh, is she your girlfriend?" Had I created the impression of, that's what I wanted?
Yeah.
Not deliberately or consciously or trying to create barriers, but inadvertently, could I have implied that we wouldn't be loving or accepting? And I don't know. You can't change the past on this stuff.
No,
Emma.
No, you can't.
I suspect a lot of it was just where he was, in his process of discovery. And it was quite a long time. After he told us, he didn't want us to tell anybody else, didn't want to tell his brother.
Oh.
Ironically, who I think at the point where Jack had only told us, we subsequently found out his brother at the same school was probably out with his friends.
Oh,
but
really?
They didn't. Yeah, they didn't know. So
they didn't have the conversation. Yeah.
No, so that came a little bit later on. And he had a very phased approach to coming out. Didn't really come out to his friends at school until very late on. I think it was shortly before he left, just before his A-levels. And interestingly, that came about, the way he tells it, he was in a sort of group discussion and one of the boys was just being really homophobic. And Jack kind of, I think, basically confronted him and said, like, "What of it? I'm gay. Like, so what's your problem?"
Wow.
Like I think he almost felt like backed into arguing back.
Yeah, it was anger that sort of forced him out of the closet. It was like, I would not have gay people talked about like that because I know differently because I am gay. Yeah.
But then I think when he went off to university, that was a much more liberating experience. He could be who he was right from the outset. He got fully involved in the gay scene and gay clubs and started started living his best life until COVID got in the way, which was a bit of a
Oh,
bind for all of the kids
oh
that were
no! I feel so sorry for students during COVID. It's just the
been
time of
ripped
your life
away.
when you
Yeah,
want to go out and party and mix with loads of different people, and to
yeah,
not be
and
able to do that must have
and
been.
it's been great actually. He's he's to see his confidence and self confidence grow. He's living abroad for a year at the moment as part of his studies, and
Wonderful.
it's just great, right?
And any partners, any potential
Yeah, yeah.
hubbies
He's
in
got a
the...
boyfriend, somebody that's been with for just over a year. So
Fabulous.
yeah,
So that's interesting though. So he came out to you at 16, but then sort of stayed in the closet in terms of being out at school for another couple of years.
yes, yeah, and even longer than that actually with grandparents. So my parents aren't around anymore, but my wife's parents are. So he wasn't out with them or really with any sort of family and friends. I mean, his friends, yes, but our friends, not so much. Whereas Matthew actually was the opposite. So he came out at 14,
Wow.
which was about kind of 18 months after his brother. There's just about three and a half years between them.
And by this stage, did he know that his brother was gay? Yeah.
Yes, but only just. So Matthew, again, came out to his mum first. It was just before he went back to school in the September, and we'd been out for lunch in the town that we live in, and we were walking back to the car. He was with his mum. I was in front with his brother, and apparently he almost just blurted out to her to go, I'm gay. And it was like a big relief. And apparently he'd sort of made a vow to himself that he was going to be out to us before he went back to school. Part of the reason being he was out at school already. So he'd been out with his friends kind of in the year before. And so in his head, I think the next hurdle was tell your parents. So it was apparently only in that summer that the boys themselves had a conversation where they kind of come out to each other.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, Jack had been out with us, but not anybody else. In the meantime, Matthew had been out at school and with his friends, but not with us. Both times it was my wife who told me. So Jack had spoken to her. She phoned me and said, Jack's come out as gay. Just don't want you being surprised, when you get home. Same thing with Matthew, was like, Matthew's, just come out. But Matthew was a lot more, I wouldn't say matter of fact. It was just kind of like, it was like, oh, okay, fine, cool.
But it sounds like it wasn't even a topic of conversation, and he wasn't upset. He just decided to blurt it out. You might have been talking about the colour of the sky, and he just went, oh, yeah. I'm gay. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think he'd set himself like a self-imposed deadline of, I'm going to tell you before I go back to school so that I can be fully out. And he was much happier, much quicker. In fact, he wanted his grandparents to know. So I got the job of, I seem to be the one that gets to tell the other people.
Oh, okay.
So I got the job of telling the grandparents.
And how did that go?
They were great. I mean, they're elderly. We were a little worried about their reaction. Generational thing, right? I mean, it's they're in the mid-80s now, but actually they were fine, and they were like, well, of course, they're our grandsons. We love them. So yeah, Matthew was out with them really quite quickly. Jack, not for a number of years. He was like, oh, no, not sure I want them to know. And it was only actually, I think, when he was in a relationship, and therefore it was, there was a realistic prospect that they might meet his boyfriend, that he was like, well, I better tell them. But again, it was like, you tell them and let me know how they reacted.
Gosh. So when Matthew came out to you, did you not just go, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, your brother is as well. Or did you not out Jack? Or did he know? I can't
remember, actually. It's a good question. I can't actually remember. I think at that point, fairly quickly, we'd established they were out to each other.
Okay.
But there had been a period where, we would want to talk to Jack, or he would want to talk to us, and we'd have to find quiet moments when his younger brother wasn't around, to snatch a conversation. So when everybody's out there, it just makes life easier. No
sneaking around.
No sneaking around.
Yeah, I bet you wish you were a fly on the wall though for that conversation between those two.
Yeah, I should actually. Tonight, when he gets back from school, I'll ask him tonight, like, who prompted who. It's, what, you as well? Like, I'm not sure how that would have happened.
Yeah, it must have been a surprise for both of them, I guess, because they're both sort of, not battling with it. That's the wrong word, but coming to terms with it.
Yeah.
To find out that your brother is gay, it must give you some solace or some camaraderie. I don't know. Must bring them closer. Are they quite close?
I think they got closer over time. I mean, 3.5 years gap when you're younger is quite a big gap.
Yeah.
You live in very different lives.
Totally.
Now, as they get, Matthew's becoming a young adult in his own right. Jack is an adult. They're starting to have a lot more in common. They're starting to be able to converse and connect on more equal terms. So that's quite nice to see.
So did Matthew get on all right then coming out at school? Because that's pretty good to come out at 14 and have all your mates at school,
Yeah, he seems to have had. I mean, I think he's at an all-boys school, which I think can be challenging. And certainly the way Jack described it, there was a reasonable amount of sort of homophobia that he witnessed, if not experienced, to other boys that were out. And I'm sure that was playing on his mind as well, that he was witnessing it and thinking, oh God, I'm gay too. That must have been painful. Matthew, I think there seems to be a different cohort. There's some other, gay and pan kids at school. He's been involved in restarting like a diversity group. So he's been quite active about it. And he's genuinely been quite proud in every sense of the word, almost from day one. So I think the year following him coming out to us, we live not far from Oxford. He was like, I'm going to march in Oxford Pride with my friends. And we were like, okay,
great.
Cool. So he was.
So has he done that? Yeah.
Yeah. So he was 15 and, joining the Pride March with some of his friends and, other friends from a local girls' school. And in some ways, he's just disarmed the bullies, because the bullies have power over you until you say, yeah, I am. And
so what? Yeah.
And your point is, and Matthew was quite chippy from that point of view. So I think in some ways, him being quite powerfully out, in some ways, probably neutralised whatever power any of the homophobic bullies might have had.
Yeah, it's really good to hear, actually, because it's just so far removed from my childhood and being at school in the 80s and so many people I've spoken to. But the fact that we now do have LGBT groups within schools, people as young as your son, 14 or 15, going to Pride marches, it's just brilliant.
And last year for Pride Month, the school flew the inclusion flag, which I think was the first time ever. And that was something that the diversity group had pushed for. We'd been in and talked to the headmaster, on behalf of Matthew, because there was one, incident that we weren't particularly happy with. So we ended up speaking to the head and actually had what felt like quite a constructive conversation about, well, what more training could you do? And I think, all schools are different, right? They're going to be on different places on their experience. But, we were kind of challenging the headmaster, who was saying, oh, yes, we our heads of pastoral care or whatever, they've been trained. And we were like, well, what about all teachers? Because it happens in every class. Like, shouldn't you train every teacher? And actually, here's a link to Stonewall's teacher training materials. And maybe you could, so we got quite proactive with the school in terms of what more they could do. And maybe they were on that path already. Maybe we helped nudge them along. But I think there's certainly a much more apparent commitment to inclusivity than maybe there would have been, and certainly more than I think Jack felt he had at that time. So I don't know whether it's a change in the school, a different cohort of kids, a bit of both.
And being helped by you as parents, as being allies to LGBT people, which is brilliant.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that I've discovered. I've sort of got much more actively involved. I've realised, I think, the power of allyship, genuine allyship and advocacy. So I've got more heavily involved in my company's Pride network, which I held back from for quite a while, because I had the false impression that the Pride network was for the LGBTQ plus community, and because I wasn't LGBTQ plus, that's not my place. Like that, I'd somehow be intruding or virtue signalling or whatever. So I kind of held myself back. And actually, now that you get involved, it's probably 50-50 allies and direct members of the community. And consistently, a message that comes back is, we need allies, right? We can't, this is not a fight we should fight on our own. It's sometimes even more powerful when you're the people to call it out and speak up, rather than waiting for us to speak up and then you agree, like why don't you lead the fight? And that's kind of opened my eyes. And you know, just heartbreaking stories of people who did not have love and acceptance, you know, from their parents. Is heartbreaking. So, well, you know, I've done joined webcasts through the work network to just try and share my story, because if that helps one other parent when their child comes out to go, it's okay, not, oh my God, get out, you know, what have we done wrong, you know, then it's worth it to share that story.
Do you know what? I can't believe that you have this guilt in you just because you made a couple of throwaway comments about, oh, who's that girl on the bus? Is she your girlfriend? When you know for a fact how much worse it could be. I mean, I've spoken to plenty of people whose parents constantly, you know, if there was ever any gay kisses or stuff about gay people on TV, they go, that's disgusting, and they turn it off, and all those messages, and worse, you know, and actually said to their own children, you better not turn out like that, you better not be gay, don't be telling me you're gay, you'll be thrown out that, you know, all of those signals. So, you know, a million times worse happens to kids. So you mustn't beat yourself up about just being the heteronormative parent and assuming people might be girlfriends. There's a lot worse that goes on, believe me.
Well, that's true.
Yeah. So why did you want to get involved in FLAG then? Why was that important to you?
Yeah, so it was my wife found FLAG, and there was the nearest sort of group to us at the time. It was kind of online resources on the web, and then a face-to-face meeting in Bristol that was originally set up by a wonderful lady called Sue Allen and her husband Bob. And I think we just wanted some assurance that we were doing the right thing, whatever the right thing is, and help just to learn from other people that have navigated this. Somebody had said, you know, when your kids come out to you go into a closet of your own making, right? And, you know, and I appreciate for my kids, you know, they come out all the time, you know, every time they're in a new scenario with new people. Yep. And it's kind of the same for us now as well, because you'll have you have that conversation with a new work colleague that might say, you know, oh, and have your sons, you know, do they have a partner? And you go, yeah, they've got a boyfriend, you know, and then you're outing them. So it is a constant process. And I think we did genuinely, we touched on it earlier, but the fact that both our sons was gay, there was a bit of a kind of what's going on here, you know, why might this be happening? And you know, there was a grief. I now recognize it as grief for the life that I imagined they were going to have. An easier life. Every parent really just wants their kids to have as good a life as they can have, whatever that entails. And the reality was, we knew this was going to make life more difficult, more challenging. And how could we support them through that? And just learning from wise parents that had been there before, done that, lived through it. It was brilliant. So we got involved with the group. We've stayed involved with the group. And actually now we're probably at the stage, I mean, I learn every meeting. We're now doing kind of Zoom calls. One of the unexpected bonuses of COVID, it moved everything online. And when you move online, you realise you can be inclusive. So the fact that you can't get to a community hall in Bristol is not a barrier, right? We can talk and share with everybody. I always learn something, but we're now at a stage where we're able to start sharing our experiences with the new parents that come along. Last month we had a call and people are like, 2 weeks ago, my son came out and I don't quite know what to make of it and what to do. And being able to just cast our mind back to where we were, share our stories, if that helps people navigate, you know, that's a good thing. That leads me to my final question, probably, which is, you know, what is the best bit of advice that you learned along the way about being a parent to a gay child or children? It was a truth that I learned early, which is that your child being gay is not a choice. Nobody's choosing this. It is who they are, right? And they're wonderful as they are. I didn't sit down when I was 14 or 15 and weigh up the pros and cons and decide I was going to be straight, right? I just was. Because if you think it's a choice, your brain goes to, well, what did we do? And what,
how can we change this? Yeah.
How could we change it? And actually, it isn't. It just is. It's the truth of who they are. And actually, the blessing, the fact that our kids came out relatively young, the positive of that is we know who they really are much earlier, right? Nobody's been living a lie. Nobody's been, having to hide who they truly are. They can be free and out, and that's a wonderful thing to do it. You talking to some of the other parents, their kids came out, to them at least, much later, and I think some of them found that quite hard, that it was later in life, or that everybody else knew first, or whatever. We didn't have that. So genuinely, it's a blessing that they came out young. So number one, it's not a choice. Number two, it's okay as a parent to struggle with this a bit, right? It is different. So I think some parents have guilty feelings about how you're feeling about it, the situation. It's okay. It's normal. It's natural. You're readjusting to a new bit of information, and that information brings with it, some worries and some changes, and that's okay. So it's okay to not be okay. It's not at all a choice. And the real joy is that you're there to love and support your kids and enable them to live their best life. And that, sorry, that wasn't one piece of advice at all, Emma.
That's fine. And it ended on the best one. So, you're there to celebrate their life and love them who they are, really. So will you all be going to some Pride events, maybe, as a family?
Hopefully. Well, bizarrely enough, it might be that me and their mum go to London Pride this year. We've signed up to do that. I'm not sure whether the boys will come or not. So we might go. We might go without them.
This is brilliant. You become more gay than they have.
Yeah. I've got a fabulous Proud Father T-shirt that I wear with pride.
Brilliant, Des. So great to chat to you. And you will look awesome in your Proud Father T-shirt. And thank you, Des, for being such a great ally too. What you've done to help make your son's school more LGBT inclusive is nothing short of brilliant. We need our allies. Well, we've had a few parents now who are part of the brilliant Flag organisation and charity. It does seem, doesn't it, that there's real power to be found in getting together and sharing advice and experiences when it comes to parenting. So if you feel like you need some help, or maybe your parents could benefit, you can find out more at fflag.org.uk. That's fflag.org.uk. And don't forget, you can interact with us and follow us on social media. We are Come Out Stories on Twitter and Coming Out Stories Pod on Instagram. Go find us. So we'll be back soon to business as usual, hearing from LGBT plus people. But before that, we have one more parent to hear from. Next episode, you'll hear Tracy with an age-old tale of a young boy with a love of dressing up.
He loved dressing up, and the dressing up box, it was always the girls' outfits he was putting on. He was always a bit of a performer. He always made people laugh. It was Jake being Jake, and that was it. His dad was fine with that, because all the kids had the dressing up box. They were all trying all different things on, or he'd come down making shows dressed in my bra and knickers. Looking back, I probably should have known, but for me, it was just kids being kids.